It is the 200 level. Mike Carpenter in the basement studio on a Wednesday afternoon, a day off of school for us. It's the end of Ramadan, and that's one day that we have for some of our students, and it is a nice day to kind of catch up on things for myself. And it just so happens to be in the middle of portal season. So I think for the third or fourth time in 200 level history, we're calling an episode Portal Combat because it's a pun so good you just got to use it more than once. And this is that time of year where uncertainty reigns, but so does excitement. And I want to start by kind of talking about coming to terms with or getting used to this idea that every year there's going to be roster upheaval, and how that does and in some ways does not change what it's like to root for a college basketball program. Think back to last year at this time when there was a lot more uncertainty about the roster. Well, I shouldn't say a lot more. Let me rephrase. Um, the way last season unfolded, I think there was a lot of uncertainty as to where exactly this thing was headed. And even though there are so many spots left for Brad Underwood and the staff to fill, it feels as if things are on an upward trajectory and you're just in a really good spot. And we're going to get to all the rumored names and what I think is probably a realistic outcome for all of this based on rumors across message boards and based on reporting from people that are in the know. It seems like this season there's a lot more clarity a lot earlier as to what your roster might look like next year. But when it comes to actually rooting for a team that year in, year out is going to have 5 or 6 new faces, and sometimes even more, maybe in the case of this team, I found out last year that that doesn't really affect my enjoyment as much as I thought. I think there was a little bit of anxiety to an extent after Illinois lost to Loyola a few years ago, and this idea that the Io Kofi experience, not only was that a fading thing to see in college basketball where you would actually have a star for more than 1 year, and for each of them you had them 3, but that when you did, you really had to capitalize on it. Otherwise, the championship window was closed. I think we're finding out there really is no such thing as a championship window, at least not in the traditional sense. So Illinois not making the Final Four this year with what was a very good team doesn't feel quite as devastating, especially when you lost to one of the best college basketball teams ever, as UConn proved against everybody. Maybe we'll touch on that later, but actually, let's do that right now. Yeah, the 30-0 run was inexcusable to UConn, but we saw against Purdue that they are just that freaking good. So if we want to call that validation or, however you want to use UConn winning the national title to not feel as bad about the Elite Eight loss, I think that's okay. They're just that good. And I think Purdue fans, whatever enjoyment they might have had during that 30-0 run by UConn in the Elite Eight, watching Illinois, their rivals, get their butts kicked, they got a taste of their own medicine on the biggest stage. So anyway, when it comes to seeing new faces every year and getting invested in a team, obviously the biggest variable in all of this is how much that team wins. And I know that sounds simplistic, but the reason why a Marcus Damask, for example, endeared himself so much to this program wasn't just because he was a fairly likable guy. He won a lot of games. And while he was only here 1 year, and we'll see if he gets his waiver. I don't know how likely that is. But let's just say it is, in fact, only 1 season he was with Illinois. He already has a legacy here. Maybe not the same as a 4-year Coleman Hawkins or a 3-year Io or a 3-year Kofi, but you could stretch it out to 2-year guys like Terrence Shannon Jr. There's a legacy here at Illinois, and of course it is somewhat contingent on what happens with the court case, but if he is found not guilty with that, guess what? His legacy here is as secure as any other Illini great. So it is different. I'm getting used to it. I think you have a coach that has gotten used to it himself and is attacking this portal in a very targeted way, and one in which I am not watching all the rumors and reports unfold with nerves so much as I am with optimism. Because when it comes to other teams starting with the Big Ten, find me another team in the Big Ten that is as adept at working the portal as Illinois. And when you look at a Big Ten that's already losing a lot of talent from last year, this seems like a window of opportunity for Illinois to get a roster that can just win the damn Big Ten. Just win it. Certainly, if things unfold as realistically so, even not even best case scenario, but realistically unfold with the names that have been bandied about for the last week and a half. And then you were looking at a team that is top 3, top 4 at worst in an 18-team Big Ten. That's the kind of program you have with Brad Underwood. And, one thing that I've said, despite my misgivings that I had with Brad Underwood, from the attrition that you had on the roster, which sometimes felt like the result of a toxicity within the program, coming to find out maybe that wasn't really so much the case, but it was hard not to question it at times. And maybe some of the in-game calling, too, the stubbornness within the game, which is ironic considering he's so flexible otherwise as a coach. One thing that I've always said about him is that he is flexible when it comes to roster construction, and you need that more than ever. So as Illinois welcomes their first visitors to campus this weekend and over the next few weeks, and this roster takes shape, you just feel like you got a steady hand at the wheel. And I don't know what that means for next year's team. I didn't think after last year's portal close that Illinois had put together a team that would ultimately finish 6th in the AP, finish 2nd in the Big Ten, make an Elite Eight, win a Big Ten tournament title. It was hard to project that with this team. They were certainly an NCAA tournament team, and that was a good thing. But they had a higher ceiling than I and many other people probably thought going into it. We won't know on April 30th or May 1st or whenever this roster is done just how good they're going to look come next March. But I do think it's fair to say that you are now at this point as a program where making tournaments is sort of second nature. And I have very little doubt that the roster they construct will be NCAA tournament caliber. It only would take another piece or two to do that. And if they get another 4 pieces, for example, you're firmly in it. You aren't sweating anything. So now that we can kind of knock that out, it's okay to start adjusting how you view this program. And in the portal age, Illinois is putting themselves in position of consistent top 25 caliber teams. And you could argue as time goes on, maybe they'll get to that consistently top 15 caliber. I'm not sure, but they aren't that far from it in the last 5 years. You are talking about, in the last 5 years, a program that has the 8th most wins in D1, or at least for Power 5 teams, right? So all of that considered, with all the other uncertainty that so many programs are feeling, the uncertainty that I feel as an Illini fan is a lot more muted. I can deal with it because I feel like that uncertainty will be addressed by a coaching staff that knows how to navigate this. So what we're going to talk about today, we got the coaching carousel. I wrote an article that I'm going to read here on the 200level.substack.com about Brad Underwood and the John Calipari situation. And as of now, as of the time of recording, it does not seem like Brad Underwood is popping up on many coaching wish lists for Kentucky fans or media pundits. Though I think that over time, if he continues to have success, that name will just pop up, even if it's on our own message boards and our own insecurities of, dear God, don't let this be another Bill Self thing, right? But the coaching carousel is in full swing. It is having a major impact on college basketball. The portal is in full swing, and we'll talk about what looks to be a fairly realistic outcome for Illinois, and it's pretty good. Now, things can change. It's recruiting. I know it's called the portal, but it's the same idea as any sort of high school recruiting you've done before. You think you got someone, something changes. Brad Underwood has a pretty high success rate. Ray J. Dennis was the last big miss, and that stung at the time, though ultimately worked out okay for Illinois. Maybe there's going to be a big sting, a big swing and a miss that you're going to face this year, but they've gotten off the ground so quickly, and it makes me wonder, and maybe Brad Underwood's spoken about this, if there's not some big board over the oven, some big board that he and his staff have throughout the season. They know guys that they've already been in contact with, or they know their agents, because, yes, some of these guys have agents, as they should, because it is now professional basketball, essentially. And, man, they've really attacked this like a program that knows what the heck they're doing. So that's all to say. I'm feeling pretty good about things. And after UConn just smokes the competition, the last bit of sour taste you had in your mouth, what was it, a week and a half ago? Not that long ago, but a week and a half ago, isn't as sour anymore. I mean, I mentioned this. You finished 6th in the AP poll. This is the 3rd best AP poll finish in Illinois history. Well, 4th. Let me see. AP poll in 2005, you finished 1 in the regular season. I think if they had a postseason one, you were number 2. In 1989, you were the 4th team. In 2001, you were 4th in the AP poll. So along with 1984, you are finishing 6th in the AP poll. Yeah, that's really good. That's a lot better than what I expected this year. So on the whole, what an awesome year, and it's kind of a nice it's a nice way to sort of propel yourself into the next season, because my mindset is much more optimistic than it was 12 months ago to the day. So before we get too far into this, got to remind you the 200 level is brought to you by DPDO, online at dpdo.com. For all the best deals and prices, dpdo.com. Mom's Day weekend is here. That means campus will probably be crazy, but no worries. You don't need to set foot on campus. They can deliver a piping hot calzone to your doorstep. Order online at dpdo.com. State Farm agent Brian Hansen, online at brianismyguy.com. Life, auto, home, business renters, you name it. Brian is our guy, and he can be your guy as well at brianismyguy.com. We're doing auto and homeowners with him and his staff. We've been doing it for over a couple years now, and the communication is super quick. Anytime we need new cards or we have an inquiry about possible addition that we could add to our homeowners or auto, Brian is super quick to respond, and anyone that, including some of my friends that have him as their guy, they say the same things. He's truly the best. Brian Hansen, State Farm agent at brianismyguy.com. Also, Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing. Give them a call at 217-841-4728. That's Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. Get your AC checkup scheduled. Excuse me. Sorry, I don't usually do podcasts on a Wednesday at 2 p.m. We're getting ours scheduled. Bear in mind, it's going to be 80 degrees on Sunday and Monday. Those warm temperatures are already here. Your AC is going to be kicking on before you know it. You want to make sure that it's in tip-top shape before the summer, so call Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing at 217-841-4728. And finally, OM Builders LLC, online at ombuildersllc.com for home additions, patios, decks. It's that time of year. Get that work done. The weather's good, even though these guys, they work 12 months a year anyway. But Luke and his staff are very quick at getting back to you as far as contractors go. You know, that can be the biggest issue, just getting them to return your damn phone calls. Dealing with one of those right now. Not a big deal. Listen, they're busy folk. But even though OM Builders are busy, their communication is really what sets them apart, along with expert craftsmanship, which you can check out online at ombuildersllc.com. All right. Champagne Showers Podcast Network, appreciate them. A reminder, as you're hearing in the opening tag, we have a new website called the 200levelpod.com, and it has everything that you could possibly want that is 200 level related: audio, video, and a column. I'm writing again. And when would this have been? I believe it was Monday afternoon that during all of this understandable anxiety struck Illini fans when John Calipari was rumored to be going to Arkansas, and that, oh, well, what if Kentucky was interested? I wrote this article called As the Carousel Turns, and the subheading is John Calipari's exit from Kentucky sparked some nerves amongst Illini basketball fans. I'm going to read this real quick, just a couple minutes, because it kind of summarizes my thoughts as to having your coach's name in one of these carousels to begin with. All right. It's nice to be wanted. To be wanted is a sign of success. In sports, success is measured by winning. Winning attracts attention. Brad Underwood has done a lot of winning in the last 5 years. So it's understandable why, when John Calipari abruptly but understandably leaves Kentucky, some Illini fans get nervous. If enough people said no to Kentucky first, would the chaos of the coaching carousel hit home? For fans of a certain age, this time of year can dredge up bad memories. April 2003. I was a sophomore at Urbana High School writing Illini basketball fluff pieces for the high school newspaper. Earlier that year, I went to a preseason practice and had the opportunity to interview Bill Self. 10 questions on a note card in my left hand, tape recorder in my right hand. The head coach answered every question as if I was a seasoned reporter. It made an impression, to say the least. The season ended a few weeks before in disappointing fashion. Brian Cook's send-off was a second-round loss to Notre Dame. Despite the finish, it was clear to every fan that Illinois basketball was in a great spot. The freshman class of D. Brown, Darren Williams, and James Augustine were immediate impact players, while sophomores Roger Powell and Luther had made great strides. In this pre-social media age, when message boards were about the only source for rumors, IlliniBoard.com was where the anxious masses gathered. It began when North Carolina fired Matt Doherty. Roy Williams was the obvious choice, though he temporarily shot down the rumor after Kansas lost to Carmelo Anthony and Syracuse in the title game. Quote, I could give a shit about North Carolina right now. I've got 13 kids in the locker room that I love. Silly me. I actually believed him. Emotions subsided, and within 10 days, Roy Williams was on his way to Chapel Hill. The Jayhawks' clear target was Bill Self. I have to give Illini fans credit. Boy, we tried our damnedest to ignore that pit-in-the-stomach feeling. We won in a full-court press of adulation, with hundreds appearing outside of the team banquet sporting I Love Myself t-shirts from WLRW, a local radio station. We knew, though. We knew all the pining and begging wouldn't change anything. Like a hopeless romantic, we watched in despair as the ultimate catch slipped through our fingers. The I Love Myself novelty t-shirt became a voodoo doll of sorts in our high school newspaper office. We ground that Gildan 100% cotton to a pulp, stabbing it with pencils, cutting it with scissors, writing all sorts of vulgarities in Sharpie until it was in tattered ruins. Few coaches could elicit such a reaction. Self was, and still is, one of a kind. He's a Hall of Fame coach whose ability to run a program is eclipsed by his ability to connect with the fan base. Underwood is not Self, but he is our guy. Merely floating the idea of him leaving for another program, unlikely as it may be, stings. Let's be clear. Brad Underwood is not the first, second, fifth, or maybe even 10th guy on Kentucky's list. It would be incredibly hard for their AD to justify the hire to a fan base longing for March success, especially when the whole nation watched UConn go on a 30-0 run in the Elite Eight. But Brad Underwood would not be the worst hire, far from it. He's a consistent winner who's navigating the NIL era about as well as anyone. His personality would play well in Lexington. Confident, a bit rough around the edges, and not overly smooth like Coach Cal. Again, this is unlikely. So why even bother writing this then? Is it to work through past traumas? To put on the proverbial cup before a possible nut punch? No, it's to recognize how nice it is to even have to worry about something like this again. If your head coach isn't getting mentioned in coaching carousel conversations, how good of a coach are they? If other fan bases wouldn't trade their current situation for yours, how good of a situation is it? Since 2019, Illinois basketball's situation is this. 117 wins, 8th most among power conference teams. Credit to @StockTalks21 who compiled that. Compared to 105 wins for Kentucky. 2 conference titles, tournament titles, Kentucky has none. 1 conference regular season title, you could argue 2. Kentucky has 1. 5 tournament wins in the last 4 seasons. Kentucky has 2. Yes, you've been more successful than Kentucky. No, that doesn't mean they're knocking down Brad Underwood's door, but it wouldn't be ridiculous if they made a phone call. I hope and ultimately think that this thought exercise is all for naught. If anything, it's nice to reflect on how far this program has come in the last 7 years. To be as good, if not better, than a blue blood over a 5-year span is proof positive of Illinois' ascent. No one wanted Bruce Weber or John Gross. No one else wanted them. By the end of their tenures, neither did Illinois fans. As the coaching carousel turns, it's nice to have your own horse on the merry-go-round, even if it's just for show. You know, that's the end of the article, sorry. It's been interesting to follow the reactions of Illini fans, and it's been very mild compared to 2003. That was a whirlwind few weeks, and it was a scary few weeks. And I remember being outside of that banquet myself with one of my buddies, Michael Murphy, who might listen to this podcast sometimes, and we wrote together in the high school newspaper. We thought by just sheer adulation and cheering for Bill Self, we could keep him. We could keep him from going to Kansas. Of course, he couldn't, and who could blame him? He is a Hall of Fame coach and probably would have been here. Not to dredge up any trauma for you. Probably would have been the same thing here, but certainly at Kansas he has been. So with Underwood, this is not the first time his name has popped up and as possible, coaching wish list. I think Kansas State, before Jeremy Tang, was maybe trying to lure Underwood. He is someone that is widely respected, and the only thing keeping him from being probably an all-star candidate is his age, and I'm not an ageist. I think that in this landscape, if you can get a guy for 7-8 years, you've done pretty good for yourselves. But I think a lot of these blue bloods would love to find that younger guy that they can have as their head coach for 20, 25 years. Now, that's probably not going to happen, whether it's Scott Drew or long shot Dan Hurley or Billy Donovan, who's almost 60 himself, if not 60 already. And then some of the other names as you go down the list, or Bruce Pearl, for example, or Chris Beard or Sean Miller. Brad Underwood is not yet really appearing on some of these lists. It's been bandied about in a couple articles, and if you peruse the Kentucky message boards, maybe once or twice, but it seems unlikely because the one sell that they need to make to their fan base is we're going to win in March again. Now, Brad Underwood got that monkey off his back for us and for our purposes, but not probably definitively enough to be a Kentucky head coaching candidate. There would be quite the upheaval. Again, I think he'd be really good there. I think his personality would fit. I think with the NIL money that he would get down there, he would kill it. It would suck if that were to happen. But I also think that you're in a good position as Illinois, where you have an AD that has seemingly a good relationship with them. You have donors that are willing to ante up for NIL as well. And you have great facilities on top of that. So everything that you would want, with a little bit less of the, if you don't win a national championship, we're going to kill your kids, which is essentially what Kentucky fans are like. To see Scott Drew's name kind of drug through the mud here as if he's just some guy. Scott Drew has turned Baylor into a top 10 program in the nation. Baylor. And keep in mind, when he got there, was after some weird scandal where there was, murder? Didn't one of their players murder another player? Something weird. They were dead as dead can be as a program, and now he has them cooking. Now, if you're Scott Drew, as much as you might like it at Baylor, Kentucky, that's a different ball game. It'd be hard to imagine him not becoming Kentucky's next head coach. And at a certain point, what more do you have to prove at Baylor? I mean, I'm even having this right now, and I'm going to stick where I'm at because I love teaching, but I have wondered, am I going to get to a certain point where, hey, I like middle school, but I just need a new challenge? All right, let's go to high school. Or if I decide to go back and get a doctorate, not planning on it, too much freaking writing. I'm getting my master's this year. I'm good for a while. But maybe I could work at Parkland with a master's, or I could work at the University of Illinois as because they have teachers that are not necessarily doctorate level people. So that's just been in the back of my mind too. You want challenges. You want to stay fresh. How much of a challenge is it for Scott Drew at Baylor? It's kind of got its own thing now. The next challenge is to go to a blue blood and win there. I think he would. I think he'd win a lot. He'd immediately attract talent, and he's a good coach. And yet you would read some of these Kentucky fans, whether it be on Twitter by just doing a Scott Drew search and filtering it by latest replies, and you would be astonished at how many people think this guy's just a scrub. He doesn't do it for me. Billy Donovan would. After as many years as Billy Donovan's been out of college coaching, you'd be more excited for him to come into this completely different landscape. I think Billy would figure it out. I'd be super excited if Billy were our coach as well, but it just seems like Scott Drew's the right play here because it's not going to be Dan Hurley. But it does say something about your program that we would even, for a second, worry about our guy being poached. We never worried about John Gross being poached. We never worried about Bruce Weber being poached. It's nice to be back in the days of Alon Kruger or Bill Self where you have to worry that, man, if this guy keeps winning, others are going to be looking at him. I do think, though, you're in a good place to keep Brad Underwood and maybe have Brad Underwood for the rest of his career. And I think last year did so much in terms of just equalizing everything, really establishing this is his program. It's on solid footing. And every year you're going to have a chance because there were just lingering little tentacles of doubt from the Loyola game and the kind of, not collapse, but weirdness of last January and February that made you wonder, does he have all his ducks in a row? Does he truly have full control of his program? I don't really question that anymore, and I don't think most Illini fans do. In that regard, this was a big year, I think, not just for Illini fans, but really for Brad Underwood as he tries to navigate the next, hopefully, 7-8 years as an Illini basketball head coach. Now, what he's doing right now is putting a roster together. We did get Tre White from Louisville. He finished his sophomore year there. He's about a 12.5 rebound a game guy, 6'7", athletic, played at USC his first year. He was a top 30-esque recruit, 5-star at one point, top 10 recruit, according to Jeremy, early in his high school career. Hasn't quite panned out as far as being a star, but he's got some pedigree there. Not the greatest three-point shooter, but a little bit better when it comes to catch and shoot. And someone that is probably not going to be a star for you next year, but a very under-the-radar depth piece that's probably going to get you 15 to 20 minutes based on the rotation. And to me, that was a surprising pickup, kind of randomly on Tuesday night. Oh, we got this guy, Tre White. Who? What? And then you read and see, oh, okay, I see why they are taking a flyer on this kid that has 2 years left of eligibility. And there is a theme here. Not just 1-year rentals, but multi-year guys. And now that extends to the next rumor. Tre White, he's in. Davis, is it not Jake Davis, right? Why should it be so hard? I should probably know this. This is why I leave it to the keeping track of all this. It's Jake Davis. Yes, I don't know why I'm thinking Jack Davis. Jake Davis, the Mercer kid who can shoot threes. Again, rotational player. I don't know how much of an impact he's going to have on next year's team, but it seems like with Tre White and Jake, not Jack, Davis, they identified roles, role-playing guys that will fit in somewhere in the 8-9 deep next year. Now, you still got to go out and get dudes. And it seems like the first domino that might fall with that is Kylan Boswell. Kylan Boswell enters the portal yesterday, or was it Monday? But regardless, very quickly, from about any source that you could ever ask, it seems like, oh, yeah, this makes sense. He's going to Illinois. Eric Bossi from 24/7 Sports put in a crystal ball pick for him almost instantly. And it does seem like this is the logical next move for Kylan Boswell. There's a kid named Bradley who was stealing some of his minutes at point guard late last year for Arizona, who's a stud on his own. And maybe change of scenery, coming back home. Kylan Boswell looks the part. Stats look pretty good. A bit streaky. If you look at his game by game, you can see a 15-pointer followed by a 3-pointer. And then an 18-point game followed by 4. But it's a guy, I think, that if he wants to come here, you got to take him. A true point guard, someone that is the old adage of floor general. He's got that. He's got a lot of Dimitri McCamey to him. And the only thing Dimitri was lacking was a better supporting cast. I think that adding Kylan Boswell would be a coup. The hometown story, if it's a feel-good story, a kid that, listen, he classified as a junior. He graduated high school, after 3 years. He goes to Arizona as a 17-year-old, 16, 17. And as many have repeated, and I think it is worth repeating, he's still 18. He will be 19 at the end of the month. He's a very young sophomore with 2 years left of eligibility and probably not a one-and-done guy as far as you're concerned because he's got some growth to do in many ways. But the questions about his maturity or does he have his head on straight, that's a fair question to have, and I understand why people would look at Kylan Boswell and think, oh, God, we did the Sky Clark thing, we did the Jaden Epps thing. Maybe it's apples and oranges, but just the fact that there's murmurs about attitude or, effort or focus, that's worth raising an eyebrow for. But I'm willing to put that risk into this, given the fact he would be coming back here, and it just seems to be something that's been in the works for a long time. This is a name that from the start of this year, it's like, I wonder when Kylan Boswell is going to be coming back to Illinois. Looks like imminently, right? That's a big pickup. It's a true point guard. The thing that we didn't have last year and ultimately worked out okay for you. But imagine if you had a point guard that could have facilitated a bit more. Then you would have opened up your offense beyond the booty ball with Marcus Damask and the transition game with Terrence Shannon. That alone was a 1-2 punch that propelled you to one of the nation's best offenses. A true point guard, in addition to the other types of offense that you're running, I think just greases the wheel even more. So Kylan Boswell, it's hard to not see him on the team next year. Now, this leaves a few other spots, right? What I'm doing right now is going through the 4 names that are being bandied about more than any other, and there's a reason why. In this day and age, it is very hard to keep information from going public. 1, Kylan Boswell. 2, AJ Storr. How imminent is that? Hard to say. This is someone that can play the waiting game a little bit and essentially negotiate a price. And for anyone that was turned off by the fact that he apparently reportedly asked for $1 million from Kansas, why? Why would that be a turnoff? Or for people that watched the last Wisconsin game against James Madison and decided, oh, well, he wasn't very good in that game, therefore I don't want AJ Storr. Terrence Shannon Jr. had some off games at Texas Tech. When we got Terrence Shannon Jr., that was merely a very nice pickup of a 3-and-D guy, not some sort of All-American thing, right? We were not picturing that. With AJ Storr, you're talking about someone that would immediately be preseason All-Big Ten first team. There's no holdup here. If he wants to come here, and if the money is right, you do it. And I would imagine that's the thought process over there with Underwood and the staff. I think this is another one of those things where it just makes sense. It just makes sense. After what Terrence did on the court for 2 years, you're essentially getting Terrence light. But I say that as not some sort of slight. It's not an insult. And in fact, you could argue that AJ Storr is ahead of where Terrence was as a sophomore himself. So Kylan Boswell, AJ Storr. Let's call AJ your 3. What about your 2? This is where Dante Maddox from Toledo has been getting the most play. And a really good podcast today from Jeremy and Derek. And Derek reiterated what a lot of people have assumed, that this has been a full court press by the Illini staff to get Maddox to commit. He's going to Louisville first, and then he is going to visit here. And if you can somehow get him to commit after that, fantastic. I would like to think that a Kylan Boswell would only help that situation by sliding Maddox over to the 2. You have someone that can handle the ball, but is a better scorer than he is a point guard. So here we got point guard Kylan Boswell. You got your 2 guard in Dante Maddox. You have AJ Storr at your 3. I know some would say, oh, well, what does this mean? Tre White is your 4? Maybe. I would imagine Ty Rodgers is your 4. And then coming in next year, I still imagine that Morez Johnson is your starting 5. There is a visitor coming this weekend, though, according to Illini Inquirer, and that is Carey Booth. Now, Carey Booth is, 6'8", 6'9", stretch 4 from Notre Dame. The guy can shoot the 3. The guy can score. He is a bit of an athletic freak. His dad is the former NBA player Kylan Booth, who's now in the Denver Nuggets front office. This is someone that they're looking to lock down, and he's only a freshman. Here's the pattern. Kylan Boswell, sophomore, 2 years left. Maddox is a 1-year rental. AJ Storr, technically only going to be a junior. We'll see if he would be a 1-year guy, right? Because he does want to go pro. Or it could be a Terrence Shannon situation where you get him back for his senior year. And then you have Booth, who would be a true sophomore next year for Illinois. This is what you would ultimately end up with, okay? Assuming that you get those 4 guys, and let's say a Nico Moretti transfers out. At your point guard position, you would have Kylan Boswell with Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn backing him up. At the 2 guard, you would have Dante Maddox. You would also have, I guess you'd say, Sincere Harris, because it sounds like, at least according to his Twitter account, that he seemed to intimate that he is coming back. At the 3, you would have AJ Storr. You would have Luke Goody, who I think would be great to have back. I thought the way Luke ended the season showed that he's still a really good college basketball player. At the 4, you're looking at Ty Booth. At the 5, let's say Morez Johnson and Amani Hansberry. I feel like I'm probably forgetting a name in there. God, I'm trying to think of all the returners. Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn, Luke Goody, Ty Rodgers. Again, I don't know if Nico is going to play there. Sincere Harris coming back as well. Tre White, didn't even mention him. He's probably a 3 or a 4. Jake Davis, a 3. Listen, AJ Storr would be your go-to guy offensively, and Dante Maddox would be your number 2 leading scorer, I would imagine. Kylan Boswell is a good floor general. You feel really good about your backcourt. Every other piece is pretty darn good, though a lot of it is unproven. I will say this, though. There's not, talent-wise, any weak links on that roster. There's a lack of experience in some places. And there would be, I think, quite the adjustment period as to figuring out what is your 8-man rotation. For the games that are really tight and you only want to go 8 deep, what's that rotation? It'd be difficult with that roster that I just threw out there to prognosticate. How does that exactly shake out? How does that work? But you give me a starting 5 of Kylan Boswell, Dante Maddox, AJ Storr, Ty Rodgers, Morez Johnson. And then off the bench, you have Luke Goody to play some 3 and D. I hope Luke comes back. I really do. And then you have a Carey Booth and a Tre White to give you some athleticism and scoring at the 3 and the 4 spots. I guess Hansberry would play a little bit of the 5. You are looking at a bit of a smaller lineup in the front court as far as the 5 position, and that hurt you some points last year. But I don't want to underrate what Morez Johnson could do as a freshman. And if anything, I think it's defensively where he could have his biggest impact. This kid is a stud. He will play immediately. I would imagine he starts immediately, unless they go out and they get a 5. But it doesn't seem like that's part of their immediate plan. Instead, it is get scoring in the backcourt and get athletic upside in the front court. So to me, that's a roster that's top 3 in the Big Ten. That's just kind of like how you've been raising this floor. It's really difficult to imagine Brad Underwood having a team in this Big Ten with that amount of talent and not winning a lot of games, because that's what Brad Underwood has done for the last 5 years in the Big Ten. The question would be, how do you shorten that rotation? How do you tighten it up? Who are your 8 go-to guys? And then the other question would be chemistry, all those other variables that you just don't know until you get a bunch of guys together. How does that all shake out? To me, it'd be an exciting process. It'd be a little bit uncertain. I think the ceiling would still be very high because of an AJ Storr and a Kylan Boswell at point guard and just talent. I mean, cream rises. And I like this team a lot this year, right? I do think that there were times where you were hindered by either a gimpy Luke Goody, who was injured for much of February. That hurt you, just at the same time that Justin Harmon really started stinking out there. Dane Danger was great down the stretch, but we also saw even the UConn game and other moments in February and March. He still had those moments where you're like, oh, gosh, Dane, it's too much, Dane, what are you doing? I don't think this would be an upgraded roster because you don't have a Terrence Shannon Jr. and you don't have a Marcus Damask. I don't think this team is going to finish 6th in the AP poll next year. But I do think that seeing them figure out what they are and what they're good at, I think that could come out to be something pretty darn good. And as you follow a program like Brad Underwood's building, not every year is going to be an Elite 8 run. Not every year is going to be a Big Ten championship. You know, we got to recognize that. It'd be amazing if it was and you had some sort of Bill Selfian run where every year you win a conference title and seemingly every year you're at least getting the second weekend of the tournament. But even if Bill Self had the Bucknells and the Bradleys early on in his tenure, where he had early exits in March, and that particular team is not going to be as fondly remembered as other ones. I don't know if this team is going to be as fondly remembered as 2024, because that was a pretty awesome team and a pretty amazing finish. So that's okay. You know, instead, I just like being able to go through an off season and look forward to the next season and say, you know what, with this group of guys, I'll take my chances. And I think that Brad Underwood, if that were the roster, and just to repeat, this is what I think is realistic here, based on what a lot of other people doing the reporting, so this is not any inside scoop. But, you know, when you read the tea leaves and you see the smoke that continues to surround certain names, Kylan Boswell at point, Dante Maddox a shooting guard, AJ Storr is your 3. Your 4, I'm going to say Ty to start, but you also got depth there with Tre White and Carey Booth. And then at the 5, you got Morez Johnson and then Hansberry as an undersized backup. But I think the defensive upside would be something. And I think that you would still find ways to score. The booty ball might not be quite to the extent as what you got used to this year, but you have guys that can get to the hole. You still have some shooters. And you would actually have a floor general in Kylan Boswell. That would excite me. So there you go. I mean, this is what we're going to be doing the next few weeks. I mean, here's what we're going to do as far as the podcast. There will be breaking news that comes out that this guy signed or this guy signed. We'll respond as those things break, right? And if you don't already, but I'm sure you do, Illini Inquirer, what Jeremy and Derek are doing over there, they got their fingers on the pulse of this, and they will probably – I mean, I know Derek does updates quite regularly. If you ever see him tweet out a chicken nugget, he's got nuggets to deliver. So that's up to the minute stuff. We're just going to simply react to news as it breaks, and the next news that would break would be commitments. And hopefully soon, because I get antsy, and I kind of want to know, what's the roster look like? What's the roster look like? And then we can have fun talking about how everything works together. Oh, forgot about Jason Jatskis. We didn't talk about Jace Butler decommitting. If, you know, seeing the writing on the wall, the playing time was going to be at a premium this year. Probably was an amicable thing. I mean, if you're Brad Underwood, you're probably like, I get it, kid. You weren't going to play a lot this year, and maybe see you down the road. And it would be interesting if a Jace Butler situation isn't all that dissimilar from an AJ Storr, where AJ Storr commits basically because of Chin Coleman, if I recall. And then he goes elsewhere. He goes to St. John's, then Wisconsin, and then ultimately works his way back here. I don't think Brad Underwood is in the business of burning bridges. I think he's far too I think he's cognizant that in this college basketball world, these circles that you run in, you'll be able to, as long as you have good relationships, kind of poach guys with fair regularity. And boy, it just seems, again, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse saying this, but they're just coming into this really focused and ready to go. Like they knew, here are targets, go get them. And I'm sure there's other teams that do that. This is not to say that Brad Underwood and his staff are a unicorn in college basketball. But I do think in the Big Ten, I mean, find me another coaching staff that you'd feel is confident going into this time of the year with all this uncertainty than the one that Underwood has. I mean, to me, that is part of why my confidence in him going forward is as high as it is. And it was only validated by what they did by making Elite Eight and that great month of March that they had, and just a great season overall. And that was the fruits of the labor that he put into the last transfer portal, which, let's just compare and contrast here. Last year, you got Marcus Damask, which you thought, that's a nice pickup. Quincy Guerrier, we finally got Quincy here. He's a good 4. Justin Harmon, okay, well, he can score a little bit. Well, Marcus Damask was great. Quincy Guerrier, I don't love. I got to be honest, for all the guys on the team, he probably drove me the most nuts the most amount of times, because in January and February especially, there was an aloofness with Quincy that I couldn't fathom. I didn't understand what was going on. And a bit spotty in March as well. You weren't winning because of Quincy. The good news is that he started playing positive minutes again in March when it mattered, and you needed him to. Justin Harmon, a non-factor offensively by the end of it, didn't hit a 3 in his last 2 months. Something crazy like that. That's not the guy you signed. That's not the guy you signed. That's not what you were hoping he would do. Now, the difference is that last year you brought back Terrence and Coleman. If you consider them part of the transfer portal last year, which, let's just do this for fun. Coleman Hawkins, Terrence Shannon, Marcus Damask, Quincy Guerrier, Justin Harmon. Okay? Those 5 versus Kylan Boswell, AJ Storr, Dante Maddox, Carey Booth, and yeah, okay. Well, that's a little bit lopsided for the team with Terrence and Coleman. But the point is this. In terms of just pure additions, I think that this would be a stronger haul. The question would be, how good is Morez Johnson? And what is Ty's role? I love Ty, but we know offensively he's a bit limited. I still think that he is going to be a leader. I think he's going to be your starting 4. Jeremy said this perfectly on his podcast with Isaac, I believe, a few days ago. I want that guy on my team. I want Ty on my team. Limitations or not, I do want Ty on my team. What my larger point is as I close out is that the targeted approach that we saw last year was more of, I'm going to find guys that I can put around, hopefully Terrence if he comes back, and hopefully Coleman if he comes back. And thank God they did. Thank our lucky stars they did. This year is, you need to get starters. You need to get dudes. And that's a different approach. But I like that, the approach of, let's say, going after Dante Maddox. That name popped up the day the season was over. And that's not an accident. That is a coaching staff that knew, we need this, go get it. To me, that immediacy of that name popping up, and then just wait until Kylan's name drops. Oh, yep, sure enough, Kylan Boswell's name dropped. AJ Storr, you figured. All these things have been in motion, it feels like, well before. I'm not saying there's any tampering or anything, but it just seems that Illinois is getting to be one of those potential destinations. If you're a transfer portal individual and you look at a school that already made all Big Ten players, of an Alfonso Plummer, of a Matthew Meyer, of a Terrence Shannon Jr., of a Marcus Damask, you are going to play, you're going to win, you're going to get accolades, and in some cases, you're going to get ready for an NBA career. and that's a great sell. So the fruits of their labor seem to be really coming into play here. Before we get out of here, it looks like we got a few. Let's see here, a few things in the chat thread. So I didn't really announce this beforehand. So thank you for those that are popping in on a Wednesday afternoon. This is from AO. Weber was 173 and 72 after 7 years. Underwood 143 and 88. Let's hold off on the statue, please. Let's look at Weber's years 3 through 7 and Underwood's years 3 through 7. I'm guessing Underwood has a substantially better record. I'm not sure what your point is, AO, but Weber was phenomenal his first 3 years with the talent that he inherited. And I don't mean that as an insult towards him. He maximized the talent that Bill Self left. That's what good coaches do. Weber could not sustain that on the recruiting front. And then we just completely bottomed out. So I'm not really sure what your point is. I'm not saying build a statue. But Underwood's job was far more difficult than what Weber's job was. Maintaining is easier than building. So that's an apples and oranges comparison. I'm not really sure, and I didn't say build a statue. Am I high on Underwood right now? Absolutely. I mean, he's given me reasons to be high on him. All right, from Bootzilla, who responded to that. Big difference. Weber took over a very good foundation. Underwood had to rebuild it. From Joe, someone has to leave. Who will it be and how many will go? I think Nico Moretti. I don't see where the fit. And if you get another one, then it might be Sincere. And that'd be a shame, but doesn't seem like there's any noise behind Ty going. The Luke thing is interesting because he walked on senior night, and I'd love to have Luke back. I think Luke's a really good player and someone that I'm comfortable with him going 15, 20 minutes a game. He was awesome in March. He was really awesome for you, so I want him back. And this is from David. Manifesting a starting five of Boswell, Maddox, Storr, Ty, and Booth. Maybe Booth does get it. That would be probably based on summer practices, and if he were better than Merez Johnson right now, I just think that the buzz around Merez is that he's really good. He's really good. And I don't expect him to be a 20-point-a-game guy. But I do think as an impact five, he can be that immediately. Defensively, rebounding, just a tough kid. You know, it's nice to have the 5-star Chicago kid coming here, and he also seems to fit that mold of, the everyday guy thing. I'm not going to buy any T-shirts to say everyday guys, because as much as I like Underwood's program at the moment, up until this year was kind of different in that way. They were relatively consistent this year. Actually, they were very consistent. In years past, the everyday guy moniker didn't quite resonate with me because I didn't think they were everyday guys. Merez Johnson kind of just exudes that like a Ty Rodgers does. He just happens to be a 5-star talent, so that's exciting to me. All right, so, hey, it's that time of year. We're speculating. We're throwing names out there. It's all fun, and hopefully we get some names to actually commit here in the next week, because it's about that time where you get visits lined up, you get guys actually starting to announce where they're going, and it'd be nice that in the next time we meet in a week or so, whatever that may be, that we get to talk about that. All right, I'm going to get out of here. Sorry, there's one more comment on the YouTube feed. Let me see if I can't get that, David, before I get out of here. Okay. Here we go, David, one more. I'm a huge fan of Booth. Going to be a pro. Could see Merez replacing Ty in that lineup, but think having two non-shooters, Merez can shoot a little bit. Yeah, it's true. Would be a little tough. That's fair, David. It's sort of like how this year you didn't have Dane and Ty on the court at the same time. You could not afford that. So, yeah, Booth, I mean, again, we're speculating. Booth is 6'8", 6'9". Coleman was 6'10". Him against fives, depending on who the five is, that could be tough. But he's also bringing that five out to the perimeter because Booth can shoot the three. So defensively in the interior, you might hurt a little bit there. But, yeah, it's this actually makes me think, David, that Ty's role is maybe the most interesting. I wish Ty could shoot. God dang it. I really wish that, and I don't know if that's ever going to happen. He's good around the basket, despite the UConn game where he was not. But who was good around the basket against UConn? And there were a couple games where Ty just kind of got the yips down there. But for the most part, he is good around the basket. His role on next year's team is going to be really intriguing to me. You know, the old school college basketball fan in me still wants Ty to be a major player in all this. I don't know if he's going to be a star, okay? But I do think that Ty will continue to get better. He's just a freaking bulldog out there, and that he is a tough enough kid that his role, he will find a role, and he will excel in it. But can you have him and Morez out there at the same time? I don't know. Can you have him? Well, Amani can shoot a little bit, as we saw. Yeah, that all of that kind of jostling and juggling will be interesting. All right, we're going to get out of here. Got to thank DP Doe online at dpdoe.com, State Farm agent Brian Hansen online at brianismyguy.com. Also got to thank Owen Builders LLC online at owenbuildersllc.com, and Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend at 217-841-4728. We'll be back here at some point. Going to wait for some news to break before we do, but knowing this time of year, it probably will sooner rather than later. So as we all continue to monitor the message boards and wait for the latest rumors to hit, I think that we're feeling pretty good at the moment, and hopefully within 2-3 weeks, we're feeling really good about the 2025 roster. All right, until next time, everybody, take care, and we'll see you soon. It is the 200 level. All right, YouTube, take care, everybody. We'll see you.